Hello there, I'm Arif Fahrudin. Welcome to Asian Agribiz podcast on transforming the humble shell egg multiple ways to maintain profitability during challenging times. Our regional correspondent for Malaysia and Singapore, Rajeswari Ramani, spoke to Nourredine el Molaka, General Manager of Sanovo Technologies Asia, on how regional egg players could find ways to repurpose their shell eggs in embracing a changing market and remain profitable as food services recover.
The regional egg industry has been stunted due to COVID-19's impacts, leading to closure and massive slowdown of food services and the hospitality sector. There seems to be an overproduction of table eggs where some farms are starting to retire layers earlier and are experiencing loss in profits, also due to falling prices as well as rising feed costs. Countries such as Malaysia were already experiencing export woes as its majority egg buyer, Singapore, implemented protectionist policies such as 30% from different countries. The question now is, how can egg players around the region look for other ways to maintain profitability? Good morning, Nourredine, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, good morning, Raj. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be a part of this interesting digital podcast. It's a way of, finding new ways to find our customers and to give them some insightful information. I hope this can be interesting for certain, egg producers or, interested people of this information.
Yes. So, could you please share with us your thoughts on how eggs and its related products could be channeled into different sectors other than as shell eggs?
Yeah, just looking back at the past 9 months, they have been very challenging, and especially food services, catering, hospitality, and tourism in most of the Asian countries have been at a very low level due to all the travel restriction, of course. So that has hit, many producers of eggs severely, and they are just being challenged to find new ways to distribute their products. They cannot just depend on the egg itself. They need to find ways, and I think looking, from our perspective as an equipment supplier, the ready-to-eat market, the retail market has been booming, and it will continue to be booming. So where I think, many of those, hit producers, they could transition into, let's say, hard-boiled eggs that can be in soft-boiled form or in hard-boiled, added with certain flavors like soya sauce or herbs or some kind of sauces like mayonnaise. I think you see that a lot now in all the convenience stores. So I think that is one way to diversify your portfolio. Another way, of course, is the e-commerce. I think that's been very big. It's already started before the pandemic, I think. But I think there's still a lot of producers that can benefit from that aspect as well. So yeah, I think there are ways. It's not easy to diversify the portfolio, and I think the ready-to-eat market is one of them. Yeah.
Okay, so how and in what ways could automation play a part in maintaining and raising profitability for egg producers in the region? Also, what kind of investment and in what sectors it will be required?
Let's start off with the whole, production of many layers in Asia. I think the main challenges that they face is, of course, labor. And as a result of that, many producers are looking into automation. And that is, that is very clear that needs to happen, that transition. And it will happen. And there's many ways to look into automation. A lot of countries, they are in a different, level of their growth path. So each country will have its own way of diversifying into automation. And another fact is not only the labor, is an issue, but also the biosecurity. I mean, we have seen what has happened with the swine producers. The last couple of years, they have been hit tremendously with the swine flu. And many layer operations, they are looking at that, and they were very conscious on how can we increase biosecurity, making sure that we prevent any major outbreak that could vanish us from the market. So those things, they go hand in hand, labor and biosecurity. And I think automation can form a role in there. And going back to your second question, where do I see, potential for increasing that or placing certain investments? As I said, different growth paths. You need to start off with, I think automation, making sure that your eggs are uniform in the market, prevent, cracks from going into the market, dirt eggs, blood spots inside the egg, and so on and so on. And there's several technologies in the market for that, not only from Sanovo, but also from other suppliers in the market, of course. So uniformity in your final product is very good, and you can, increase that by adding vision systems, as I mentioned before. And of course, the next step will be robotic automation. We have already seen that in countries like Singapore or Korea. But I think also other countries will follow the robotic automation transition. It's just mandatory because you will have a certain, product that is going in that direction. And then another thing is, it's a very hot topic, of course, food safety and traceability. We have seen countries like Taiwan and Korea implementing certain guidelines to trace back eggs on where they're coming from. So I think, looking at Sanovo, we have just started the joint venture with a company that is doing traceability in the egg grading and packing industry. So I think that's one of the ways to, to place investment and to be ahead of the market.
So that's really interesting, Nourredine. Can you expand a little bit on the robotic automation, please?
Yeah, of course. Robotic automation, it's actually, robots are taking over the labor that is normally done by a human, placing the final egg packs into a carton, palletizing that carton, prevent, operators from heavy lifting. I think that's also a very important thing. I mean, lifting a stack of trays every day, it's very heavy, and in the long run, I mean, it could get you some issues on your backs and so on. So I think, there's a lot of things that can be automated and a lot of things that can be done in a good and, sustainable way.
You talked about Taiwan and Korea implementing traceability standards through automation. Can you also explain a little bit about that? Because I think our listeners would be interested in listening to that because of the assurance that they can give customers at the moment, especially.
What we have seen in Korea, once they had the avian influenza, I think that was in 2016-17. They started looking at, okay, what can we do to prevent this kind of outbreaks? So of course, biosecurity was high on the agenda, but also they wanted to see how can we trace back eggs on where they're coming from. So there's a lot of, companies that locally in Korea that started supplying traceability systems, that are suitable for the Korean market. They didn't tend to look at, suppliers from Europe, but mainly in that form traceability. And it's just tracing eggs from where they're coming from, from the farm going to a grading center, and from there to the distribution center, finally to the retailers, with printing. So all the eggs, they are mandatory to be printed, and each producer have their unique code. So I think that was a good start for Korea to look at, okay, what can we do to raise awareness and to make sure that that food safety is high on the agenda.
What kind of activities could be used to raise the value of eggs to give them a wider berth in the market? And how are the larger players making strides in this sense?
Yeah, I mean, Asia is a very, diverse market. All the countries, they are in a different level of where they are, especially, let's say, if we compare egg consumption. Malaysia, the egg consumption is about 300 eggs per capita. But if you go to Indonesia, it's only 90. So there's a huge difference in egg consumption within the countries in Asia. So I think if you look at, for example, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Korea, and Taiwan, they are estimated between 200 to 300 eggs per capita, whereas countries like Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam, they are still around 90 to 100 eggs per capita. So I think there's a huge leap that they can bridge to increase and to create awareness of egg consumption. in those countries. So I think there's far more potential in those countries in the short term than, for example, Singapore and Malaysia. Yeah. And let's look at Singapore as as an example. They transitioned from 15 years ago from just traditional farmers, egg farmers, into, let's say, food processing facilities. And that's has happened just in 10 years' time, where they fully automated the processes. They diversified the portfolio, not just sticking to egg itself, but going into direction of hard-boiled eggs, soft-boiled, let's say, Japanese omelets, liquid egg, and so on and so on. So they have really diversified the portfolio, which, that now they are benefiting from it, in the market, because they are not just relying on the egg, as a shell egg in the market. So I think that's a perfect example for a lot of countries to look at. Okay, how did Singapore made that transition, and what is necessary for them to come to that same platform?
Okay, so using that as an example, you said that in the Indonesian market is consuming less than, let's say, Malaysia and Singapore. So to actually promote that market to consume more eggs, going into processing, will that be a good idea? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's definitely a good idea. I mean, in many ways, you will increase the egg consumption because there's more ways to use eggs. And on the other side, for the producers themselves, they will have different revenue streams, and I think that is very important. We have seen that in all over the world, and I think Asia is following very soon. I think that trend is happening. We get a lot of signals from the market, especially during this pandemic in countries, let's say Indonesia and Philippines in particular. They're really coming up and looking at, okay, what can we do to diversify our portfolio, and I think that's a good step in the right direction. Yeah, definitely. And the larger players are playing a very important role in there, because they are the forefronts of this, and they need to drive the market to bring it to the next level and to uplift the level of the producers of eggs. Yeah.
Eggs are versatile to be used for technical functions such as binding and coagulant substance, or used in other foods such as mayonnaise, confectionery, baby food. What is the prevalence of this in our Asian industry, and what will be needed to encourage it to keep the industry successful?
Now, let me just say that I'm just still very surprised on how versatile an egg is in how many products it can be used. I mean, if you look at it, it's just remarkable that such a product can be used in so many different kind of final products. So that being said, I think the future is very bright for the egg producers. Of course, there will be always bumps along the way where there's oversupply or there's let's say less demand and so on. But in general, the egg consumption will grow, and especially in the countries that we have discussed in previous question. And one of the most important things that I have seen in Asia is of course the transition of consumer behavior. There's less consumers going to wet markets, and they will transition in going to retailers and supermarkets and so on. So I think that's also a good way for egg producers, because that means that there will be increase of living standards, and that will also drive further processing of eggs and eggs being used in many different products as a ready to eat product. So I think that's a very good transition. Then on the other hand, I mean, we should not underestimate the impact of COVID-19 outbreak. I think that will put a lot of pressure on many communities, and it will bring them back to, let's say, into a different level of their spendable income. So it's going to take a while before we recover from that. And in that looking at from that point of view, also egg can be a way of increasing egg consumption, because egg is a sustainable, cheap, but also nutritious product. So I think that's an easy way to go from, for example, meat into eggs, into higher consumption of eggs. So that's definitely a lot of functionalities we see of eggs used in mayonnaise, for example. So I think also those kind of sauces will be increased also in Asia. I mean, if you look at, for example, the consumption of mayonnaise in Japan, I think that will also drip down to the rest of Asia where you see an increase of that specific product where egg is used a lot.
Cagefree is an ongoing buzzword. How do you see the industry transitioning towards that without losing profitability, and how will experts like you, Sanovo, cater to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I was born and raised in the Netherlands, and since I've been working in Sanovo, I was also taking care of the Netherlands and Belgium as a sales manager. And at that time, the transition happened from going from cages into cage-free, and that was regulated by the governments. And I think that forced them more or less to go into that direction. Where I see in Asia, there's not a government-regulated system in place that will drive all the producers in that direction. I think it's more or less consumer-driven, where you see a couple of producers, targeting that specific market. So I think it's going to be a niche market. I don't expect it to be at the same extent of, for example, Europe in that direction. And I think, producers will benefit from it, that they can choose more or less which market they want to target. So I think it eventually will end up in a niche market. Yeah. And, Sanovo, let's look at our view on the market and the cage-free discussion. I think what's more important to focus on is traceability and food safety. I think that will have more impact on the market and be, in the benefit of the consumer. And another topic that is also very important is climate change. And we're also looking at developing our, products and our equipment in a way that we can utilize less energy and savings of water and so on. So I think that's our role that we play in this whole discussion of, cage-free, but also climate change. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I do have a bonus question. In this week itself, there has been quite a buzz on plant-based and cultured protein products. A startup in Singapore called Float Foods is planning to make egg that looks exactly like the actual thing, with egg white and yolk as opposed to just eggs blended plant-based liquid version. A company in France is also going to launch what is a breakable plant-based egg. Do you see these alternatives being a competition to real eggs at all?
I don't think so. I think that whole trend going into plant-based and healthy way as they promote it is going to go ahead. And I think there's a specific, targeted group for it. But looking at it now, it's still in the early steps and people are not confident about it yet. And they need to see the results. And of course, the taste will make a huge difference. But if I just look at the egg producer, I mean, the way that the egg is produced is the most sustainable way possible, comparing it to other livestock production. So I think, if you're being conscious about what you eat, I think egg is one of the best, protein sources to eat. So in the long run, it will go hand in hand. Companies like Just Eat and those plant-based companies will have their existence, of course, and they will increase their production as well. But do we need to be worried at all from our sector? I don't think so. I mean, look at it from a point of view of milk. You also have a lot of plant-based milk products. Did milk vanish from the market? Absolutely not. People only tend to drink more milk if I speak to people from the milk industry. So I don't think it's going to be a huge impact on the egg industry. I think it will more or less go hand in hand where there's an alternative. I think for egg producers, it's more important for them to focus on diversifying their product portfolio in order not to see, when you come in a supermarket, you don't only see eggs as a generic product in a pack, but you have alternative ways. Let's say you want to buy a hard-boiled eggs that is ready. You want to buy liquid, there needs to be alternative. I think that's where the transition should go in the long run.
Okay, great. Nourredine, thank you for coming on board today and giving us some great key takeaways about possible repurposing of shell eggs to maintain profitability for our Asian Agribiz listeners. We hope we can speak to you again soon in the near future.
Thank you very much for having me, Rush, and it was a pleasure to do this podcast. It's my first one, so I hope I did well, and let's hope we can have more of this kind of insightful, conversation in the future, maybe with other, stakeholders in the industry. I think that's very important to keep that discussion ongoing.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope this podcast has given you some ideas on how to diversify egg business into different channels, as the opportunities are certainly there. Do share the podcast with your friends and colleagues, and visit www.asian-agribiz.com to see what other insightful podcasts you can listen to. I'm Arif, signing off from Indonesia.